ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Shocking evidence, jury drama and witness cross-examinations. The Case Of podcast takes you inside the biggest trials in the country, reporting the in-depth detail of how courts work and who's in there each week. We've brought you Erin Patterson's mushroom murder trial, the case of Toya's murder in Cairns, a Canberra cold case, the two intruders, and many more. Search for The Case Of, it's on ABC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
He's massing troops in the Middle East, but says he's winding down the war in Iran. So, will Donald Trump keep the conflict going or end it? Today, Kelly Grieco, defence strategy expert from the Stimson Centre, on why whatever Trump's next move is, the chaos will continue. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Kelly, it seems clear at this point that Donald Trump has, two options. He either escalates or ends the war in Iran. Why don't we first consider the possibility that actually Donald Trump wants out and he's ready to walk away? Pete Hegseth, the so-called war secretary, he seems to be saying the US could exit the war even if the Strait of Hormuz remains deadlocked.
This is an international waterway that we use less than most, in fact, dramatically less than most. So the world ought to pay attention and be prepared to stand up. President Trump's been willing to do the heavy lifting on behalf of the free world.
I mean, this is a remarkable statement in some sense. The administration is very focused on these tangible military objectives that they can measure in some way. You know, the number of ships sunk, the number of missile launchers destroyed. What it leaves out, of course, is this issue of the Strait of Hormuz that is now closed, was open before the war and is now closed.
Well, first on the Strait of Hormuz, our core objectives from day one, from me, from the chairman, from the president, from the vice president, from Secretary Rubio and others have been clear. Defense missile production and missile programs, defense industrial base and production ability to build, and Navy and power projection.
What is interesting is that the administration in the last about 48 hours has tried to walk away from that being any part of the overall objectives. I think there's been a recognition in the administration that there are no good military options for reopening the strait.
Look, the problem with the strait, a guy can take a mine, drop it in the water, and say, oh, it's unsafe. It's not like you're taking out an army or you're taking out a country or that's not for us. That'll be for France. That'll be for whoever's using the strait.
If the United States wanted to, it could reopen the strait, but it would be a very costly operation. It would be a long-term operation. And so I think it's trying to void any type of commitment or idea that that's part of what they're trying to achieve so that they can essentially declare victory if they want to.
We'll be leaving very soon. We're negotiating with them right now, but we're finishing the job. And I think within maybe 2 weeks, maybe a couple of days longer to do the job.
Wow, yeah, and Donald Trump is very unhappy with traditional allies like the UK and Australia for that matter. He says they should learn to fight for themselves.
Saying on social media that nations should build up some delayed courage, go to the Strait of Hormuz and just take it. Right.
So basically he's saying over to you with the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, I mean, this is also, quite a statement to say because, of course, he started a war that didn't inform any of his allies, didn't discuss it with them, and now seems to be upset that they're not supporting a war they were not informed about or had an opportunity, to influence. I would just say two things about this idea of, wanting allies to do more. One, the United States doesn't want to take on this mission itself, so I don't know why it would think its allies would. And the second I would just say is that, for a year now, one of the messages of the Trump administration to allies has been, yes, do more, but do more for your own security in your own neighborhood. And now, because it finds itself in trouble in the Middle East, it's now saying to countries like Australia and the United Kingdom, no, not in your neighborhood. We'd like you to do it in the Middle East. So very inconsistent in its messaging.
Yeah, as always. The other thing, of course, that Donald Trump has been saying over the past few days is that he has achieved regime change in Iran and that he's pretty sure he can make a deal with this sort of new, what some people see as fictional regime.
But we've had regime change, if you look already, because the one regime was decimated, destroyed. They're all dead. The next regime is mostly dead. And the third regime, we're dealing with different people than anybody's dealt with before. It's a whole different group of people. So I would consider that regime change. And frankly, they've been very reasonable. So I think we've had regime
But
change.
there's no indication whatsoever, is there, that Iran is willing to negotiate? Iran's foreign minister this week has said there are no formal negotiations underway, none at all.
Well, first of all, obviously this is a bit of a fiction, the idea that it's a different regime. It's the same revolutionary government, but if this allows, Donald Trump to save face and so we can bring this war to an end, well, then I guess, we won't complain. But what I would say about the Iranians is I think the Iranian position is actually a bit more nuanced in that publicly they're denying this notion that they're negotiating. And I guess they're technically correct because this is mostly being done through intermediaries. But I think the fact that when the administration presented its 15-point plan, that the Iranians didn't just completely say no. They actually proposed what their 5 main points were, which to me I took as an opening, position in negotiations. I think they are also looking to see if it's possible to negotiate an end because they feel they've achieved what they need to.
But if Donald Trump, if he walked away right now, what exactly would be left behind? I mean, he might say he's won the war, but it doesn't mean he has, right?
Oh, I not at all. I mean, I would say right now, if the United States walks away, it's a strategic loss. It's much like the story in Iraq and Afghanistan, where the United States won militarily at a very tactical level, but it's hard not to see this as an enormous strategic loss. He'd be leaving with the Strait of Hormuz closed. He'd be leaving with Gulf partners that are quite angry, frankly, with Washington about this war, even if they're also angry with Iran. And he would be leaving with really having provided some sanctions relief to Russia as well. And so there's no strategic gain here in any meaningful sense of the word.
All right, well, Kelly, let's then turn to option 2, which is basically escalation. We can see American troops are massing in the region.
The US President Donald Trump is deploying thousands of Marines and extra battleships to the Middle
A
East.
further 3,500 US troops have just arrived in the Middle East, and some American media outlets are reporting the Pentagon is preparing for ground operations.
What do we know about that? What's happening?
Yeah, so they've basically sent, a Marine Expeditionary Unit from the Indo-Pacific, another one coming from stateside from the United States, and then elements of the 82nd Airborne. The 82nd Airborne, these parts of it kind of work as a 911 response force at times, but we're not talking very large numbers of troops, which I think is important to emphasize. Certainly not anything near what you would need to really conduct, an invasion of Iran. If there is a ground option, on the table, they're considering it's clearly a very limited one. Probably, some of these smaller islands in the Strait of Hormuz or Karg Island. That seems to be what they're at least trying to signal is on the table.
Yes, it will take the number to about 50,000 US troops in the Middle East. As you say, that's not a huge number in the big scale of things. But Donald Trump, he has threatened to obliterate, one of his favourite words, of course, Karg Island. Now, this is Iran's key oil export hub where 90% of its oil passes through. So just to explain that and how significant a ground operation there would be.
I mean, I think you see Donald Trump as trying to find some source of leverage in these negotiations because really Iran has the upper hand because the Strait of Hormuz is closed and it's impacting, the global economy. One option here is Karg Island to try to seize it, to cut off Iran from these oil exports. I doubt that would be sufficient, frankly, to cause the Iranian regime to change its position much. It would certainly take quite a bit of time for that impact to be felt as well. But just looking at it as a ground operation, there are a couple of challenges here. One is if it's the Marines that are going to land, ashore, they would have to sail up the Strait of Hormuz. And just getting to the island itself, they would be under, missile drone threats, fast attack boats in the strait that could potentially attack them. And then once you do get ashore, you are so close to the Iranian mainland, about 25 kilometers, that you would be under constant threat of air and missile threats. Wow. It's a different kind of operation than what we've seen in the last 30 years, where the United States has really not faced these airborne threats. Be very, very dangerous and I think costly.
Yeah, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament has said his nation's forces would rain down fire on any invading troops and that Iran would set them on fire. So there would inevitably be US casualties, wouldn't there?
Yes, I think that is certainly the case, sadly. And I think, would be higher than what many people would expect given what they've seen in recent years, because this would just be a very different kind of threat environment. And it's a very unfavorable one. I mean, you're also talking about putting a relative small number of troops on this kind of island that would be sort of a remote outpost, if you will. And then you have to also think about how are you going to resupply them? There are so many logistics complications with this operation. And again, all of this being done under constant air and maritime threats. Very challenging.
What other targets could the US be considering if it was to go that step further and bring in ground troops?
I think there's two other possibilities. One is there are these smaller islands that are located, very close or in the Strait of Hormuz itself. So they could decide to put forces on those islands to basically prevent them from being outposts for Iranian missiles and drones, and then to try to maybe start some escort operations, trying to secure the Strait of Hormuz. And then the other one that has been mentioned at times is this idea of sending forces, probably more likely to be special operations forces, deep into Iran to try to secure the nuclear material. That's very challenging, given you are talking about going deep into Iran, but also this material has now been buried by U.S. strikes. So just the process of digging, would take time to be able to even get to that material, much less trying to get it out safely.
Of course, this all could be, if you like, a ruse, right? It's not a very secret plan if it is the actual plan. But I mean, once also Donald Trump makes this move to bring these troops into the Middle East, he could go either way, right? It's certainly an option.
Yes, and I think you see this in the messaging from the administration and the fact that every hour I'm reading one quote where it sounds like he really wants, there to be a deal, and another one where he's threatening that he may just escalate.
Well, Kelly, if the decision is to escalate by using ground forces, tell me, what should we expect? Does it necessarily have to mean a much longer war?
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time seeing that if there is a ground operation taken, that it doesn't result in a much longer war, because the United States will have increased its commitment and will take time to achieve any of these ground objectives. And at the same time, there isn't sign that, the Iranian regime is close to collapse or to giving up. And that, to me, seems like a recipe for a long conflict. I have a hard time imagining anything else other than if there's, at that point, some attempt by parties to really, push for a diplomatic breakthrough, whether that's the Chinese or even the Russians as well, maybe putting more pressure on Tehran.
All right. And if Donald Trump walks away now, what would the world be left with at this point?
Well, then the world is going to be left behind with the fact that the Strait of Hormuz could potentially still remain closed, or to the extent that it's open, there's now going to be a toll that has to be paid to the Iranians to be able to use it. Either way, this is going to have, economic consequences, over the long term. And I think there's a bigger one here, too, not just in terms of the economics, but just about, are we comfortable? Are we going to accept the idea that a country can decide to, impose this kind of control over one of these major choke points? It certainly challenges the notion of freedom of the seas, the right of passage and transit for commerce. And I think that has, significant implications, even as we think about the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah. And tell me then, in your mind, as an expert, which way do you think Trump will go?
I think that if Trump can get a deal, he'll take it. I think he realizes it at this point that he needs it. And the question, I think, really is more, does Tehran want to offer it? I think what it comes down to is the administration would like a deal. They'd like to get that deal. But if they can't get a deal, then they've backed themselves into a corner now where either they just unilaterally decide to say, the war's over and we don't care about the Strait of Hormuz, so we're just going to leave it as is, or it's going to have to escalate in some way to force open the Strait of Hormuz. And these are clearly the very unenviable choices available to them right now.
Kelly Grieco is a senior fellow at the Stimson Centre, a non-partisan think tank in Washington, DC. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening.